that was the CN crew office, and I just got called to take a train from Vancouver to Kamloops. Want to come along for the ride? It's a wonderful trip. Lots of beautiful scenery. You're going to enjoy it. Let's go. Our trip begins at CN's Portman train marshalling yards in Surrey, BC. This is where trains are made up and disassembled. I report for work here, pick up my paperwork and documentation in that little orange building you see area. From there, I'm transported to the train. Get on board, check out the engine and the train and the paperwork, call the dispatcher for the okay to go. That's the engineman, and this is a view of the interior of the cab of the engine. It has all the facilities: fridge, stove, microwave,
okay, what are we going to do, Bob?
bathroom.
Are we going to have a chance to...
And now we're off.
to work this?
We're hauling about 12,000 tons right now. We're going by the East Yardmaster's shack, and then we'll see the yard engines that they use to switch the trains about. We're gonna go by the surge and unit yards where trains are yarded and made up. We'll next go by the Vancouver Intermodal Yard, where containers and tractor trailers are placed on flat cars for shipment across Canada. And there's an inbound freight train. He's at the end of his journey. We're going through historic Fort Langley. The old CN train station is now a museum. The historic Fort Langley itself is just beyond that grove of trees. It's quite spectacular. And on the left is the boat launch and the little park down to the Fraser River. A lot of fish boats are moored along the river. Fishing is a big industry here. We meet a lot of trains along the road. This is our second meet. As soon as he gets by us, we're on our way again. We're now sweeping across the lower mainland, on our way to Hope, BC. Basically, the lower mainland is a broad valley, agricultural based, and actually very scenic. We're going to be following the Fraser River for most of this route, past all the farms and towns along the way. The trip that we're taking takes about 11 hours to do. You're going to do it in 40 minutes. I will be tired by the time it's over. You won't. We are heading eastward towards Hope. When we get to Hope, we'll turn north and head north all the way to Savannah, BC, at which point we'll head eastward again towards Kamloops. The northern leg of the trip will be through the Fraser Canyon and Thompson River Canyon. We pass by a lot of little pastoral farms. This is one of them. I believe it's called the Blue Ridge Farm. I do a lot of horseback riding and rodeos right at this location. It's 229 miles from Vancouver to Kamloops. We'll pass by about 153 signals, go over countless bridges, through many tunnels. We're going to pass by slide detector fences, washout detectors, snow sheds, overhead water diversions. Here we're coming up to 3 little bridges. Oh, and there's some sectionmen out there working on the track, keeping it safe for us. Train speeds average 40 to 60 miles an hour across the lower mainland. We're really moving. Once we head north up the Fraser Canyon, our speed reduces to 30 to 40 miles an hour and stays that way pretty well all the way into Kamloops. At 60 miles an hour, things happen real fast on trains. At 30 miles an hour, you have a chance to relax and enjoy the scenery, as well as taking care of the train. We're heading through Hope now. This is where we turn northward and leave the lower mainland and enter the Fraser Canyon. Our trip is over 2 subdivisions. The Yale subdivision, which stretches from Vancouver to Boston Bar, and the Ashcroft subdivision, which goes from Boston Bar all the way into Kamloops. The river level is quite low right now, but it's not always that way. In 1996, after Christmas, the lower mainland was paralyzed by a fierce snowstorm. Road, air, and rail traffic in and out of the lower mainland was halted for several days. The spring runoff the following year raised the Fraser River to record levels, the legacy of which is a log that got trapped as the river level receded and marks the high point of the river's height. It remains precariously perched on Saddle Rock as a permanent reminder of how high the river got that year. A few decades ago, a boxcar of butter popped out of a train due to poor train handling. It rolled down the bank and floated to the other side of the river. Everybody thought it was a CP car, and no one could figure out how a boxcar could disappear between Edmonton and Vancouver. The train crew that lost the car just figured that their train had come apart. They coupled it up and continued on their way to Vancouver. We are now only 17 miles from Boston Bar, which is about halfway to Kamloops. The most interesting scenery is still yet to come. The tracks rest on a ledge carved into the side of a mountain. It is straight up and straight down in many places. The track is always curving, and there are a lot of sections of slow track. The series of poles are a slide detector fence. Wires are strung between the poles. When the slide comes down, it breaks the wires, setting off a warning signal to the trains well in advance of the obstruction. There is a CP rail bridge over a waterfall on the other side of the river. The sectionmen we just passed are hard at work stabilizing the roadbed so it doesn't fall into the canyon. They do this by drilling holes into the bank, inserting steel rods, and then filling the holes with concrete. We are approaching Hell's Gate. It is where the Fraser River forces its way through the narrowest point on its course. Fish ladders have been built to help the salmon get past this point as they head upstream to spawn. They have built an air tram to take the tourists down from the highway above us to the viewing area below. When the river is high, the view is awesome. In the winter and spring, this portion of the Fraser Canyon is one of the most dangerous. You can see just how steep the canyon wall is in this area. This is another CP rail bridge over a waterfall. We are now leaving Hicks, the last station on the Yale subdivision. The Anderson River Bridge is very high and built on a curve. The Anderson River Delta is underwater in the spring, and the river is swollen with runoff. We are now entering Boston Bar Yard. A sawmill is the town's main industry. A snowplow is stored here, so it is handy to clear the winter snow slides. Boston Bar has one of the last turntables that is still serviceable. The old station has been moved away from the tracks and is undergoing restoration. Boston Bar is the turnaround point for crews from Vancouver and Kamloops that work one subdivision. They lay over in this old bunkhouse. A new bunkhouse is under construction, and this one will soon be demolished. A quick stop to enjoy the scenery. Then we are off again. We are halfway to Kamloops now. We still have another 4 to 5 hours to go. We are approaching the site of an old train wreck. It is hard to see, but there is a locomotive down there. On March 26, 1997, a tragic accident claimed the lives of conductor Terry Gallus and engineman Don Fink. They were heading east out of Vancouver, and at 6:45 that morning, they were approaching Conrad at track speed. A sulfur train had been set out earlier on the siding at Conrad. They had no warning that the roadbed had washed out under the tracks and that a portion of the sulfur train had fallen into the giant hole that the washout had created. With no chance to avoid disaster, they rode their train into the washout and onto the sulfur cars below. The crash caused a fire that ignited the sulfur and burned for days. The engines and cars were never recovered. CN has since installed washout detectors in an attempt to give the crews a warning of a missing or unstable roadbed. It is hard to pass this site without remembering this accident. We are approaching the Cisco Bridge. This is where we cross over to the west side of the river, and the CP crosses over to the east side. The CP built their line first and chose the best side of the river to build on. In their haste to complete their line, they didn't pay much attention to minimizing grades, and consequently, they are always going uphill or downhill. CN got the poorer side to build on, but they made their track level by comparison. We can see the CP bridge from ours. We cross back over to the east side of the river just before Lytton. Lytton is usually the hottest spot in Canada during the summer. We are leaving the temperate rainforest of the coast and entering the semi-arid desert of the interior. Lytton is at the junction of the two rivers, and that is where we cross the Thompson and follow it into Counties. The junction of the Fraser and Thompson rivers is just ahead. You can see the clear water of the Thompson on one side and the muddy water of the Fraser on the other as they slowly mix together. The Thompson River is smaller than the Fraser, but more scenic. A lot of river rafters and kayakers find the Thompson River very challenging. The Rocky Mountaineer passenger train is Canada's equivalent to the Orient Express. Tourists come from all over the world to ride this train. It runs during daylight only, and at night the passengers are put up in hotels. They have built special observation cars for the passengers to enjoy the views. There is a sharp curve in Highway number 1 as it parallels the CP tracks on the other side of the river. Trucks often miss this turn and tumble onto the tracks, spilling their load down the bank. CP had to build a slide detector fence to warn the trains of a truck on the tracks. I spotted a broken rail at a backtrack switch. 26 to 28 inches of rail was missing. The weight of the train was supported only by the thin part of the switch point. I walked my train across the break. The track was then declared impassable until repaired. There are a lot of mountain sheep along the Thompson River. They often start minor slides that trigger the slide detector fences. This group of river rafters has stopped for lunch. Because there were no roads to much of the rail line in this area, CN had built suspension bridges across the river to provide access. A few still remain today. We passed by more river rafters, wigwams, and lots more mountain sheep. Though this area is very picturesque, it is too dry and rocky to be developed or farmed. It will probably remain an unofficial wildlife preserve forever. Our train just startled a bear. The only buildings in this area are an abandoned church and house. Any trees we see around here are either by the water or high on the mountains where it is cooler. This is in stark contrast to the lower mainland where trees grow in the valley, but not high on the mountains. Only sagebrush flourishes in this semi-arid desert. There is a CP train on the other side of the river. We coast along at 35 miles per hour on level track. This is very peaceful country. There are very few back roads and no public crossings to whistle. We rarely see another person unless he is working on the track. If it wasn't for the railroad, this country would remain relatively untouched by people. It is so dry here that the landscape is unweathered and remains much the way it was thousands of years ago. Yesterday, at Basque, an eastbound train on the main was meeting a westbound train that was taking the siding. The eastbound train didn't stop at the signal indicating stop. It passed the signal and sideswiped the westbound as it was pulling into the siding. Fortunately, no one was hurt. If the westbound had been a minute slower, this would have been a head-on collision. If it had been a minute faster, the eastbound would have speared a tank car of liquefied natural gas. It could easily have been a very serious accident. The newer engines are designed to protect the cab of the locomotive. This engine survived the impact very well compared to the hopper car that took the brunt of the collision. We are about to enter the Black Canyon. It is called that because the coal deposits in the land are exposed. They absorb and hold the heat. It is like traveling through an oven in the summer. I believe this would be one of the hot spots of Canada if there were weather recording equipment here. The coal deposits make the slopes somewhat unstable. Ahead you can see where a giant slide occurred in 1880. It blocked the river for 44 hours. In 5 miles you will see a sign commemorating this event. I feel very fortunate to have a job that allows me to appreciate the beauty of British Columbia, and yet I can only get a glimpse of a small portion of the province from a train. There used to be a sawmill here. The beehive burner is all that remains. I can't imagine where they got their logs from. Up on the poles are a couple of ospreys and their nest. This is a sign commemorating the big slide that I pointed out earlier. When this railroad was built, they tried to tunnel through the hills instead of going around them. The hills around here are composed of clay and stones. The tunnels kept caving in during construction. Several workers died before it was decided to take a different route. This is what remains of the old Maccabee homestead. Rumor has it that it was once a stagecoach station. If you look closely, you can see the blue paint of the first in-ground swimming pool built in BC. We are approaching another tunnel that the builders gave up on and decided to take a different route. Very little remains of the Wallachine Aqueduct, or the town of Wallachine itself. The aqueduct was built to bring water to the town by gravity. Electricity was not yet invented to pump up the water from the river. Wallachine was a thriving community during the last century, but all the able-bodied men volunteered for the First World War. Only 4 out of more than 100 came back. The town soon died too. We are approaching Savannah. The Thompson River begins here as the overflow from Kamloops Lake. Kamloops Lake is very large and picturesque. There are some cabins here, and occasionally we see a boat on the water. I am surprised at how little recreational activity takes place here. I suppose the reason is that there are even nicer lakes near Kamloops. The painted hills of Gillespie get their colors from the variety of mineral deposits in the ground. They are most spectacular in the early morning, just after sunrise. Unfortunately, this scene does not portray the vibrant colors that give these hills their name. In the right light, the mixture of greens, blues, reds, and orange is awesome. We are only 15 miles out of Kamloops now. We continue to follow Kamloops Lake right into town. Soon we'll be on double track for our last high-speed run before we yard our train.
You're looking good both sides. Okay, thanks.
It's time to call the Kamloops Yardmaster and get yarding instructions for our train. This is the last bridge we'll cross. It spans the North Thompson River. Kamloops is located at the junction of the North Thompson and South Thompson rivers, and the city center is to the right. To the left, we have the CN yards on one side of the river and a subdivision on the other. The brick CN administration building is just ahead of us, and the white yard office is just a little further down the track. We pull into the track that was given to us by the yardmaster. A new crew will soon be taking our train to Jasper, and other crews will take it further east. We secured the engines, and our trip is over. We are taken to a modern hotel for our layover in Kamloops. It has all the amenities to help us enjoy our stay. Well, that's it for the trip. I had a good time. I hope you did too. And now I think I'm gonna watch a little TV and get some rest. Take care.